Colonel Douglas Macgregor commanded the last tank battle that the U.S. Army participated in during the first Iraq War, a graduate of West Point and a frequent guest, joins us now to assess the likelihood of a regime change war against Maduro. Doug, thanks so much for coming on. Are we doing this?
It looks bad. In fact, it looks like it could happen on 4 or 5 November. The reason I bring that up, it just so happens to be a full moon, which would lend credence to the argument that lunatics are ruling us in Washington, D.C. You know, you've gone down the list of reasons, and there are a couple that I would add, because I recently went into D.C. and I talked to some people. Some of the people I talked to are just below the decision maker level. And these are the usual smug resume builders who come in and out through every administration, hoping that at some point they'll get a high level appointment. And they said a couple of things that I thought were interesting. First, they said, well, you got to understand, Doug, we're flipping the chessboard on Russia and China. I said, what? Oh, yes. Don't you understand? By going into Venezuela, we're saying a very strong message because Russia and China have tried to build up and cultivate support there. And we're telling them that they can't do it. We're flipping the chessboard. Well, I said, I don't think the Russians are prepared to fight for Venezuela. In fact, I know that Putin has given very explicit instructions to the Venezuelans. You're on your own. We'll give you equipment and assistance if we can, but forget it. We're not going to fight for you. The Chinese certainly aren't going to send the Chinese Navy to the Caribbean to stand off and fight us. That's not going to happen. And I said that. I said, so, you can't make this argument that this has some great strategic value that justifies this enormous task force. And, it ultimately boiled down to it's time for us to be strong again. As though bombing hapless people in Venezuela or Colombia or Nicaragua or anywhere in Latin America is testimony to our greatness as a nation. And then, of course, the final straw is, well, we've got to destroy the drug problem where it originates. Well, I've got a big flash of the obvious. The drug problem originates here inside the United States. You're not going to get anywhere by bombing Mexico just because Mexico provides most of the fentanyl. And when I say Mexico, we're talking about the cartels. And Mexico's an organized crime state. It has been for a while. They're going to do what they can, but the Mexican army is much more responsive to the cartels than it is to the president of Mexico. So, bombing these places isn't going to stop anything. It's not going to improve anything. It may turn out to rally all of Latin America against us. The evil Yankee who's intervening yet again inside Central and South America. We're blamed for almost everything that's wrong down there. All we're doing is saying, I guess you're right. Look what we're doing now. It's not going to change anything. But that means you've got to come home. This seems to be the thing that no one in Washington wants to do. Somebody said, Doug, what do you want to come home for? We have troops all over the place. What do you want to come back here for? I said, because what happens here is far more important and existential for us than anything beyond our borders. The world has changed. Putting little packets of troops or ships here or there isn't going to stop things from happening overseas. They're going to happen whether we like it or not. And the good news is most of what happens beyond our borders doesn't matter to us. It's not a reflection on us. We need to focus here. And I said, if you exercise some restraint right now, you bring the forces back to the United States, defend the borders, defend the coastal waters, and then crack down on the peddlers. And I would add child trafficking to the drug trafficking.
Of course.
And I would impose the death penalty for anybody who engages in it. That means you're going to go to trial, and if you're found guilty, you're going to face the death penalty. Everybody says, oh, that's terrible. But it's okay to bomb Venezuela. Don't execute the drug peddler or the child trafficker, but let's bomb Venezuela. Doesn't make any damn sense whatsoever. That's where people's heads are right now in Washington, D.C.
But I worry. I mean, it used to be, well, you're the Army officer, you tell me. But my understanding was in a democracy, in our republic, the president has constitutional authority to just send troops and start wars effectively, even without congressional approval, I've noticed. But there was always this expectation that someone would explain why we're doing this. You didn't want to go into a conflict because, of course, you never really know what's going to happen without getting the public on board. And I don't think I know 5 people who know this is about to happen.
Well, you bring something up that's very interesting. Somebody pointed out to me just the other day, Benjamin Franklin told the population that was standing out in front of Independence Hall when they asked, "What sort of government do we have now, Mr. Franklin?" This is after the Constitutional Convention. He said, "Well, you have a republic if you can keep it." And he said, "We need to change that because today, if Ben Franklin came back, he would say, 'You have a drama queen republic if you can keep it.'"
Yeah.
We have a lot of frivolous theatrics in Washington that passes for diplomacy and policy. We have a president, and you know that I like the president personally, always have. But everything is about theatrics and optics and appearances. And now we have the Prime Minister of Japan, who just made wonderful deals for Japan with us, by the way. Japan is going to continue to buy oil and gas from Russia. There will be no change in that. Japan is going to invest more in the United States. We're already heavily invested here as it is. That's not a big deal. Although Toyota has since come back and said, we're not increasing our investment. Sorry, we didn't make that promise. But she gave Donald Trump the most expensive set of golf clubs in world history. They're beautiful. They're magnificent. And she promised that she would nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. And suddenly, President Trump says, "This has been a big success. We are winning." So now he goes on to South Korea. I'm sure he'll get some similar treatment there. And oh, by the way, I see no evidence that India is going to stop buying oil and gas from Russia either. And now we have this ceasefire that was declared a few weeks ago that's just completely disastrously violated by the Israelis. And everybody says, okay, that's fine. So what are we dealing with? We're dealing with facades, illusions. And I think Venezuela is another illusion. Instead of doing exactly what you've suggested, turning inward, focusing here at home on what's important, bring the forces back. If we'll exercise some restraint now, we'll build more capability for the future. But there is no long-term planning. We launched a tariff war. There's no stability in the tariff regime. It's driving everyone crazy. They talk about the dollar as reserve currency. That's all shifting into pure gold now. Ask Nassim Taleb. Ask Ray Dalio. Ask anybody. Gold is the new reserve currency. We're not even prepared for that world. We're not paying attention to it. Let's bomb Venezuela. Let's bomb Colombia. Let's punish those bastards. They're the ones that created this drug problem. No, they're not. They're feeding an appetite in North America for something that people will pay a lot of money for. Crack down on the appetite at home, secure the borders, the coastal waters, and stay out of Central and South America.
I don't understand how, I mean, our public conversation is so dominated by Hamas, Hezbollah, all these faraway, Ukraine, Russia, these faraway conflicts, groups that are really not connected to the United States and haven't over time posed a meaningful threat to the United States. You're not even allowed to say that. Hamas does not pose a threat to the United States and never has. Like, why am I more mad about Hamas than I'm mad about the open air drug market in Philadelphia? Why don't any politicians in the Congress put the open air drug market in Philadelphia above the threat of Hamas? What is that?
Well, I think you have an answer of sorts. And it comes, interestingly enough, from Mrs. Machado. I don't know if she's married or not, so I call her Mrs. She may just be Miss Machado. She's the lady that just won the Nobel Peace Prize, and she's from Venezuela. And she said, if we're liberated by the U.S. Armed Forces and they remove Maduro, our first act will be to move the Venezuelan embassy to Jerusalem.
What does that have to do with? I'm completely confused. Like, what?
Well, you can't be that confused. I think she's hit on something very important. She's figured out where the power lies, and she's playing to the audience that makes the decisions. You're talking about this democracy business. We've always been a republic with limited democracy, but I think we can pretty much conclude that we're ruled now by a small group of extraordinarily wealthy people. Billionaire oligarchs. Those are the terms they use in Eastern Europe and places like Ukraine.
Yeah.
I think they're in charge. I think they're calling the shots. And I think there are interests in the oil resources, oil and gas primarily, although let's face it, they've got gold mines and emerald mines as well, and other things. I'm told they have a lot of lithium. There may be a true interest in putting in a puppet government and finding a way to extract these resources, because right now, for the first time in 30 years, all the central banks beyond the borders of the United States around the world hold more gold than we do. That's a very important thing to understand. So how do you begin to reverse this process of managed decline, which is really what we've been on now for the last 25 years? Well, oil is part of it. Oil is gold. And even though the oil is exactly what you described, it's heavy oil, high sulfur content, requires a lot of refining. But still, we have the best oil engineers in the world, especially for deep drilling. It will probably, for the same amount of money we pay for 1 barrel of oil out of the ground in the United States, we can probably get 2 out of Venezuela. It's still not as good as Iran or Libya, where you could probably get 3 barrels out for what we spend to drill in the United States. But it doesn't look like we're going to get control of the Iranian oil fields. And I think we've bullied the Emirates and the Saudis about as much as we can at the moment. And Iran stands defiant. So look for another war in the Middle East while all of this is unfolding, because Israel's objectives aren't met. Neither are the objectives of the New York and London banks. I think we're in a lot of trouble financially, and there's a genuine interest in controlling resources to offset that crisis.
Do you think this is a resource play, that this is motivated by control?
I think it's a big part.
But I mean, would it actually take an invasion? I mean, Lindsey Graham was salivating at the idea of boots on the ground in Venezuela. That'll confuse the crap out of most Americans if that happens. But why not just go to Maduro? I think he offered.
Well, that's what I was just going to tell you, that we didn't have to go to Mr. Maduro. He came to us.
Right.
And in fact, President Trump was questioned in the Oval Office last week. And they said, we understand that Mr. Maduro approached you through intermediaries, no doubt, and offered you a very lucrative deal. I'm told it was about a stake in the oil and gas industry, all sorts of things like that. And he replied, he said, oh, yes, it was not just a good deal. He offered everything. And so people looked and said, was that not enough? No, that's not enough. I think there's something else going on here beyond that.
Clearly.
That's what I'm asking. I asked people, and some people have said, well, you remember Venezuela was involved in that Dominion software scandal. Remember that Dominion software was developed for Hugo Chavez. I said, okay, maybe this is a personal grudge match. I don't know. But I do know that there's this feeling that President Trump needs a win. He wants a win. He's not going to get a win out of Ukraine. Doesn't look like he's going to get a win out of the Middle East. So where does he go for a win? I guess.
How about Philadelphia or Portland? No,
well,
I'm serious. I mean, that was the whole point. That was why people voted for that. It's not hard, and for the resources we're spending just to send the ships to the Caribbean, you could do a lot for downtown Atlanta. Like, isn't that what people want?
77 million people voted for exactly what you're describing. There's no question about it. But I don't think that is necessarily the kind of theater that Washington's interested in. And I don't think people on the Hill, may also include friends of President Trump and others, are necessarily going to profit from any of that activity. I mean, we're watching an awful lot of huge $100 million, billion-dollar deals closed all over the place by people connected back to Washington right now. That's not new. We saw that under the Biden and Clinton administrations, but it's certainly vulgar and out in the open right now. You don't close those kinds of deals by shutting down the drug trade and the child trafficking in Philadelphia or Seattle or anywhere else.
I do think it's fair for people to say, okay, do your deals, do your crypto or whatever, but we don't want to live like animals, and we want, our kids to be able to buy a home, and there should be more balance here. Like, no presidency should be completely dominated by foreign policy concerns, and yet most of them seem to be.
Well, they're drawn into it because it's a wonderful platform for them to display their decisiveness, their strength, their courage, their leadership. That's the way people think of it. But you're right. It's an illusion. And you know what? I know President Trump from the standpoint of foreign policy to some extent. It was very clear to me the last time I spoke with him and worked with him that he wanted to get our forces out of Europe. Now, very recently, nobody's paid any attention to it, but suddenly we're finally withdrawing troops from Romania and Bulgaria. That's a very wise thing to do. Thank God. Let's get them out of Poland, get them out of Lithuania, start pulling them out of Germany. We don't need those forces over there. And the Europeans don't need those forces. There is no threat to Europe from Russia. I think he knows that. I think he knows that China isn't going to invade Taiwan. And so you see him moving through Asia diplomatically and behind the scenes. Everybody is telling him, we're not supporting a war with China. China is not a military threat to us. I think he understands that. So I think he wants to focus at home. But this thing in the Caribbean basin is clearly not an original idea on his part. He agrees the threat from Central and South America, but particularly Central America, is very serious. He knows that. But the issue is, how do you deal with it? And you deal with it along the lines that we've described. But how do you face people who say, well, I don't want you to arrest someone, and then if they're found guilty, punish them with the death penalty if they're trafficking children or they're trafficking drugs. But the same people that object to that will turn around and say, well, I don't want you to bomb innocent people in Venezuela or Colombia. They need to make up their minds. They need to understand what is required, what is necessary for the survival of the country. You're right. You know, we had a dispute over this federal law issue back in 1861. We solved it. It was ugly, but we did it. And we may have to solve it again. I keep wondering when the John Brown moment arrives. We've got a lot of evidence that one is coming, because we can't let governors and mayors stand there and pour filth and abuse all over our federal laws and simply say, no, we won't enforce them. And by the way, we regard you and your police forces as the enemy.
Yeah.
It's insane.
So since you're, I just have to ask you a final question about Russia-Ukraine. When does that conflict end?
My impression is that since President Trump concluded that he wasn't going to get a ceasefire that he could tout as another great foreign policy achievement like the last ceasefire in Gaza, he's lost interest. I think he knows that he can't settle that. But remember, he made remarks before he was elected, which were very unfortunate, telling everyone, I can end this with a phone call in 24 hours. No understanding whatsoever of the problem. That is very unfortunate. The problem is far more serious. By the end of this week, he is going to meet, I think it's in the next few days, it may be next week, I don't know. He's going to be meeting with the leaders of the 5 Central Asian republics, you know, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and so forth. He wants to talk to them about commercial arrangements with us and trade. This is going to be a real serious issue for the Russians and the Chinese. First of all, Moscow has not forgotten our attempted coup at about in January, February of 2022, when we tried to overthrow the government in Uzbekistan. The Russians went in there at the request of the president and stabilized it. This was another one of these color revolutions cooked up by the National Endowment for Democracy, which should be the National Endowment for Anarchy, and of course the CIA, always. The CIA mucks around in Central Asia all the time. We're still pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into places like Afghanistan that are really destined to support subversive elements in Central Asia. The Russians don't like it. They don't want it. Neither do the Chinese. They want stability there. They want to build the one belt, one road, which they know will bring prosperity to the people of Central Asia. And they also have a long memory. They don't want Central Asia to become what it was a few hundred years ago, which was the greatest force in the world under someone like Genghis Khan. And people laugh. Well, you don't understand Central Asia and the people that live there. But they could be mobilized. They could be united and present a real danger to everyone. The Russians and the Chinese understand this. They don't want that to happen. But we're in the business of subverting and destabilizing. And this visit now will not be treated as something positive in Moscow. They will see this as another attempt to undermine Russian and Chinese security. That's a meeting he doesn't need to hold. But he's going everywhere. He's selling America. That's his argument. I don't think people understand the implications. So the bottom line is President Trump has great instincts, but then he walks into the swamp and he gets mugged early. And people distract him into areas where he's not familiar. And they're going to put an end to his presidency if they drag him into Venezuela. That place is a terrible, terrible mess for us. We can't fix it. We shouldn't try. Let the people that live there do it. And if they say, well, they can't, well, that's their problem. It's their home.
Yeah.
Remember, Venezuela has 1,700 miles of coastline, 1,370-mile border with Colombia, 1,380-mile border with Brazil. And I'm being told by people with experience down there that you've got 100,000 paramilitaries along their border in Brazil and Colombia that are just can't wait to go into Venezuela and fight us if we go into that country. And this sort of thing will spread. It's the last thing that we need. What we need is stability and peace. I would urge the president to reconsider his rejection of this proposal from Maduro and get out of this business of regime change, particularly when you know that somebody like Machado is playing to the wrong audience. Well, what a joke. Why are we trying to install this woman? It makes no sense.
Well, because she'll bring gay marriage to Venezuela, and that's important. I mean, that's what we stand for.
Well, you got some real criminals. Let me just finish up here real quick. On the hills around Caracas, you've got as many as 8,000 Colombian drug criminals. They're there. There's no question about it. Maduro has clamped down on them, contrary to what people here think. He's holding them in check. That's not an easy thing to do in Latin America. As you know, you visited El Salvador.
Yep.
You know the region. You know what it's like. This woman can't do that. So my point is that if you don't like it now, it'll get a lot worse if we go in there.
Yeah, but I mean, is he protecting the trans community? No. So let's kill him. Thank you, Doug. Great to see you.
Thank you, Tucker.